Services Marketing, MKT 625, lecture number 27.
Assalamu alaikum, Khawateen and Hazrat. This is Wasim Ahsan, your instructor for the course Services Marketing MKT 625 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. I welcome you to lecture number 27, and we still are in the process of learning what a service is. We all know that service blueprinting is the foundation of the good service design. And with the help of a service blueprint, we come up with all the tasks which are a division of all the major activities required to deliver a service. So what happens is, with the help of designing a blueprint, we can make sure that no task is left out, no role is overlooked, and no relationship is omitted from the service design. By coming up with this service blueprint, we also can get into the levels of the blueprint, which are customers' actions, then employees' actions, on-stage employees' actions, the backstage, and then the processes. So in other words, with the help of the divisions on the service blueprinting, not only that we can come up with all the tasks required to deliver a service, we also can get into the subdivision by components. The understanding of these components brings a lot of clarity into the whole process by way of looking into roles and relationships, which I talked about just a moment ago. And we really can make the whole process very efficient and very productive. I would like to talk about efficiency and productivity in just about a few moments. But before that, let me give you one more example to your benefit, because I just would like to make sure we all know how to come up with a service blueprint. Just think for a while that you were to start a motorbike rental service. Very interesting concept. And one way is that we look at the whole thing in an oversimplified manner, keep it incomplete and vague, because we think everybody has a complete understanding of how to rent a bike and collect money from the customer and so on and so forth. The other way of going about the whole thing is that you come up with a relevant service blueprinting. When you do that, you're bound to look into all the tasks which will form a good quality service. Now, let us talk about all those tasks in a systematic, methodical manner. The customer walks into the facility, and you give him an introduction to the service by offering different models and sizes of motorbikes that you have. You talk about the pricing and in relation to the time at which the customer might use the bike for. You ask the customer to give you some kind of identification, and most logically it is going to be by way of the customer presenting his license. Some documentation takes place, the customer makes the advance, and then you take him to the bike that he has chosen and give him a brief introduction of the condition of the bike is in. And hopefully the bike is in good condition, and you talk about all those aspects which really matter to the customer in terms of using that particular bike. The customer takes the bike away, uses it for a particular period of time for which he already has made the payment, comes back to the service and hands over the keys to the person responsible for collecting the bike. And here again, there is some evidence of service by way of closing the transaction. Now, if you look at the whole thing in terms of all the tasking, you will realize it is quite a bit of the complication involved into it, right from the time the customer walks in and then defining the roles, who's going to do what, who's going to take him around and show him the bike, and who's going to receive the payment, and who's going to give him the orientation about the condition of the bike, and so on and so forth. All these things are shown onto the service blueprint, and you also can get into different levels of the components of this particular blueprint. If we take a closer look at this particular example, we shall realize that many of the actions have taken place above the line of visibility. In other words, whatever is happening is visible to the customer, and it is a combination of the actions taken by the customer and his interaction with the employee on stage. This is kind of a service which is very rich in terms of the on-stage component. But then again, there are some processes which are taking place below the line of interaction, meaning there are people who are taking into consideration the accounting part of it. The money that's been paid by the customer is taken into account of that particular bike and model which was rented out. And once it is done that, you also have to relate that with the maintainability of that particular bike, the maintenance cost that the company keeps incurring on that particular bike also has to be taken into account. So you can realize that once a transaction takes place in terms of this particular service, it impacts all the components, meaning all the levels of the service blueprint. Now, when I talk about this impact, this is something which the designer has to conceive before the service is really put together and is implemented and tested. This is the beauty of the service blueprint. It really sets your juices flowing into thinking about the right and accurate kind of tasks which are going to form the whole process. And once you have defined the process, you realize that it is not just a collection of tasks or division and subdivision of the component levels. It is roles, relationships, and that are translated into so many different kinds of HR strategies and technical moves. Because the one particular service might dictate that there's a need for more specialized kind of people in order to render the service in a very qualitative manner. And you might also realize the need for more cross-training when it comes to delivering the one particular service. And you might also realize that you need to hire more people because you want to create a balance between the outputs and inputs of the different parts of the process that are taking place in total entirety and integration. Now, when I talk about this integration, I think I have to take you to another concept, which is the concept of efficiency and productivity. A service, the blueprinting really helps us to come up with a service design which is capable of letting us maximize the efficiency and productivity part of the service design. That is the beauty of the service blueprinting. What we can do is we can get into calculating each and every task which is performed by an individual or a bunch of individuals in order to complete one particular phase or stage of the process. I'm hoping that we're all familiar with the concept of operations management, which says that output of one particular phase must equal the input of another, because only that way we can achieve balancing. Otherwise, we have the imbalance or disequilibrium. In order for this balance to take place, we come up with this service blueprinting. And therefore, it really helps us in maintaining the balance of production, leading us to high efficiency and productivity. How do we do that? We calculate the time spent on each task, like I said, by individuals, and relate that with the input and output of different phases. To give you one example, let me take you back to the kitchen of the sandwich company, which is coming up with sandwiches for direct delivery to customers. They are coming up with sandwiches by a certain speed, and they realize that there's a backlog at the packing stage, meaning all the sandwiches which are prepared are waiting for efficient packing, and that is not happening only because you have just one packer. So the simplest example dictates that you put in one more packer or two more packers who match the output of the preceding phase, meaning the number of sandwiches being prepared by a bunch of individuals must equal the packing speed of the individuals who should be there. Now, it is upon you to calculate whether you need one, two, or three. And it is a question of basic arithmetic by getting into the time and motion study as to how much time it takes to come up with one particular step. So what happens is you can bring about a balance between two different phases, thereby achieving high efficiency and productivity. You have to achieve high efficiency and productivity, especially when you have the strategic position of operating cost efficiency. If you follow that particular strategy, it demands that you must go for high volumes and cut your costs. You cannot cut your costs unless you achieve that kind of equilibrium which I just talked about. So what you can do is you can divide the total production cost or one particular phase or one particular component of the service, or maybe the total service by the output which you have achieved, meaning the enhanced output that you have achieved, and will realize that the cost has gone down. So in other words, you draw a comparison between costing of the phase which was taking place before you brought about this streamlining with the phase which is streamlined, and then see the cost really going down. So it is not the cost which is going down, it also is enhanced output. And when you have enhanced output, you really can fulfill the soaring demand if you are in that kind of a situation of your customers. Otherwise, you're going to be late in terms of delivery. And this is another thing which blueprinting really helps us maintain and establish that we really can complete all the tasks on time. And not only on time, but we also can stress all those points which can affect quality. Now, the lack of efficient packing can take us into a situation where we are not delivering on time and thus getting complaints from our customers. Instead of listening to those complaints and then getting into recovery strategies, wouldn't it be better that we took care of that in the first place by bringing about the balance between the two phases of production, because the two phases of production really affect the way that we deliver our service. And this is all about efficiency and high productivity, which we can achieve with the help of the service blueprinting. So we have seen that we can divide a particular service into so many different components, and we can look into roles and relationships. We can look into the division of tasks for the sake of ensuring that the process is complete, it is accurate, it is not vague, and so on and so forth. And we also can get into high efficiency and high productivity, in addition to optimal production, which we should get if we have the right design in front of us. So when we are into the stage of service development and implementation, and then of course testing, we already have taken care of this service blueprinting. And I would like to relate this particular point with the whole strategic process not being very linear, meaning it does not take place in one straight line. There are so many factors and so many phases and stages which take place simultaneously, and it is upon you to decide and determine which stage has to be taken care of at what particular time, so that you can integrate all the facets of the strategic process together to come up with a design which is a well-structured design geared to deliver quality service. Now, after having talked about the components of the service and the blueprinting and the factor of high efficiency and productivity, let me now take you back to what is it that we must consider in order to make sure that the service is complete. I did talk about the basic planning checklist when you come up with a service blueprint. We now are into a stage where we should be talking a little more in detail about all those facts and factors that we must take into consideration to ensure that the service is very comprehensive, meaning the design is complete and accurate. No bias, no ambiguities, and so on and so forth. The first thing that we must ask ourselves and look into is that the process is mapped in its entirety. We must be clear about the initiation to the point of the process, and where it ends is something that we have to be very clear about. We must know who the customer is and what are the interaction points which are going to take place once the customer walks into the facility. And we also should be clear about which component of the service we are coming up with at a particular point in time. and after it is complete, we then move on to the next one, not before that. So it is the initiation of the process or the mapping of the process with the point of initiation which is initiated by the customer, so to say. And it takes us into all the points of interaction between the customer and the service provider, meaning the front-end provider who is the on-stage actor or the on-stage employee. After we have mapped the whole process in terms of the different components, because it is not just going to end at the first level, it is going to take you into other components as well. I was talking about completing the first component first and then move on to the next one. But then I must also point out that there are offshoots and the spillover effects of one particular interaction which may take you into the next phase or the next phase, and immediately you should draw that before you go further back into the first component which you are handling. Mapping of the process is the first consideration that we must be very sensitive about, and that takes us into the second one, which is the segmentation. We have to be very clear about which segment we are dealing with toward the delivery of the particular service that we are designing or that we are coming up with the blueprint of. You know very well that the different segments have different requirements, and therefore the blueprinting or the process flow of one particular service for one particular segment is going to be different from another one. It may differ by a marginal feature, but the fact is that it is a different segment and it has a different process flow, and therefore we should not be talking about two different segments or multi-segments at the same time. The portrayal of the blueprinting should not be preferably multi-segmental. However, what you can do is you can come up with the two or three the different blueprints and then connect them with the interface wherever it takes place, and then you can see the whole set of processes that take place within the organization. And this is something which the people sitting right on top of operations and marketing and sales may like to look into, just in order to have a feel of the total integration of all the processes from a company, meaning overall company's standpoint. But in terms of designing the blueprint, you have to be very clear about portraying the process flow relating to one particular segment. To take you back to the example of the self-service on petrol stations, you will recall if customers were to self-serve themselves, the process is going to be entirely different, because in that case, the customer is going to pull up first, walk up to the window, and talk with an attendant to pay a certain amount of money that he needs petrol for. And after he has made the payment, the attendant is going to do something with the mechanism which will allow the customer to fill up the tank of his or her car against the amount he has paid. Now, from the time the customer gets out of the car, walks up to the window, interacts with the employee there, meaning the on-stage employee, comes back to the car, gets the petrol, and drives away, it is a set of certain tasks which are to be designed just in order to make sure that nothing is left out and omitted, so that we really can come up with a beautiful execution of the process. I would again say that these are the kind of things which do sound very simple and straightforward, and they really are in essence. But when it comes to execution, this is where many of the providers go wrong by oversimplifying and by keeping their service design incomplete. If the books and the academic material is full of examples of many services being incomplete and inaccurate, we have to believe that this must be the case in so many of services. So things which look oversimplified and too straightforward are the ones where we have to tax our brains in order to really divide one particular activity into all those possible tasks which can be defined as separate tasks performed at separate times. The meaning tasks which cannot be handled simultaneously by one particular person. If there are two tasks to be performed by two different persons, then of course it is not something simple, and it requires our attention to come up with the required strength of the number of people that we should have at a particular task so that it is performed efficiently and productively. Let's go back to the example of the packing of sandwiches, and you will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, after we have looked into the segmentation, the side of it, the third consideration that we must have is that of team effort. Let me tell you that coming up with an accurate blueprint is not the task to be assigned to one particular individual or a section within the organization with this particular responsibility and then working in isolation of the remaining organization. No, it is not that. It is a team effort which has to be owned by all the departments of the organization so that they have a sense of ownership in the process. It therefore is a multi-departmental effort and not something which is taken care of by one individual or one particular department. People have got to contribute toward the service delivery, and given the fact that services are inseparable, the meaning consumption and production take place at the same time and at the same place, we've got to be even more mindful of this particular factor. And this is something which is going to take us into the next consideration, which is very important, and that is the consideration of developing a service, or meaning coming up with a service design which is very close to the desired level of the customer and not just the adequate level. And let us talk about this particular consideration in light of service blueprinting. I think it is something really exciting. And after having talked about the multi-departmental effort, I think that we can dilate that further into this concept by talking about the inevitability of a team effort in terms of the delivery mechanism. Because of the characteristic of inseparability, all over again, I would say that we have to be extremely careful and sensitive about the desired level of service. You know why? Because it is here that we really look into all those points which are very important in terms of the quality delivery of the service. Let me explain this phenomenon with the help of the very generalized kind of an example. If you think that in order to come up with quality service, you need to further expand the steps and put in more people into the process just to make sure that it is of high quality, then you should not hesitate doing so. But look at the implications as well. When you put in more people, because the process is now lengthier and a little more complex, just in order to ensure that the delivery is of very high quality and is close to the desired level of service, it is going to translate into costs. Now, if you are willing to put in more costs, you also must be able to get returns on that cost. And you will get returns if you really deliver quality service. So this is the one example. It also may demand on part of the company that you train people in terms of cross-functional expertise, meaning the one particular person in one particular department must also know what is going on in the other, so that he also becomes kind of an expert on that as well. Now, the level of expertise really remains in one particular area in case of every human being. But then, in case of services, we should get training in terms of cross functions. And this is what they call cross-training. So if we realize the need for cross-training, that takes us back into the strategies of internal marketing. We have to conduct certain training programs in order to make people more efficient, and that will have its reflection in the blueprinting. So this is one of the considerations that the blueprint may really actuate us to have and to give weight to. Another example could be that of the hiring the more people and so on and so forth. I think with the examples that I've given to you, you now fully are in a position to understand how you really can use a blueprint to make sure which really are the quality points and where things might go wrong. And you have to keep things from going wrong. And once you do so, you have to tax your brains, like I said earlier, to make sure that the process is comprehensive and it is up to the expectations of customers, meaning it will come up to the expectations of customers once the service is delivered. Related with this consideration is the next one, which dictates that we look into all the possible fail points. Now, fail points, again, are the ones which could also be viewed as those where quality must take place. And therefore, those should also be stressed in terms of the possibility of their failure. And if you think that something that might still go wrong because of the nature of the process there, I mean, if you think there might something go wrong in terms of the preparation of the sandwiches, because it's a question of humans putting things together, and one of the individuals might forget to put one of the important condiments into the sandwich. So what is it that you should do at that particular moment? Well, you get back into the recovery strategies and make that a part of your blueprint. What you can do is you can draw a few more steps a little away from the core service and relate that with the possible fail point. So this is the importance of fail point in the light of this particular example. If you talk about the bike rental, something might go wrong with maintenance, and that is something which is on the process side, meaning the support component of the service design. And you've got to really concentrate as a strategic measure on how you maintain your bikes, so that when you give the bike to the customer gets that in the best of condition. And this is all about the consideration of the possible fail points, which should also be identified on the service blueprint. And it is stress on those fail points which really ensure that we deliver the service of the quality which is desired by our customers. The last consideration, which I would call number 6, is that we have to make sure that we have taken into the design all the possible details in relation to the actions by customer, the actions by employees on stage, actions by employees backstage, and we also have taken into consideration all the support processes or the support component which are going to enable us to deliver the service. And the comprehensiveness of the blueprint is a function of all the considerations that I've talked about, and all those considerations converge at this particular point, which necessitates that we take into consideration all the details. This is all about the strategic considerations to come up with a very comprehensive blueprint. And with this grounding, I think that we should be in a position to draw one. And like I suggested in the previous lecture, just take a service of your choice and try to come up with a blueprint of that particular service. And after I have now talked about the benefits which you derive out of drawing a blueprint, you will be in a position to jot down all the benefits which you can get out of that particular service which you blueprint. Let us therefore talk about the benefits one by one. Well, the very first benefit is that a service blueprint identifies relationships, and this is something I really have rubbed in so many times over. This really takes us back to the classification of services, and the very first classification of services is the nature of organization. And you can realize that after having learned service blueprinting that it really can have an impact on the structure of the organization by way of having more people, or by way of having less people, or by way of having the more sophisticated processes which are backed by automation, computerization, and so on and so forth. It could be so many different things which I would like to leave to your imagination, which may come to your support as the service providers of very high quality service. So the impact of the blueprint in terms of the nature of the organization is clear before all of us. The next benefit is that it identifies the fail points. And this is something which I talked just a few moments ago. And I may not therefore like to rub that too much in again. But I would like to reiterate that the stress on fail points is very important from the standpoint of revealing our quality points. And this automatically takes us to a benefit, which is that of quality. We know with the help of this blueprinting where customer really experiences quality, and we must stress those particular points. Now, this is not to say that not all the points are important in terms of quality. As a matter of fact, it is the collective effort and it is the collection of all those tasks that we get the end result in terms of quality. But then at the same time, there are certain points which are to be stressed more than others. And it is with the help of blueprinting that we really can identify those points. The next benefit is with the help of the components. A blueprint that really lets a company decide which actions on part of the employees to be made visible and which are not to be made visible. Because there are certain operational strategies whereby you would like to keep the actions on part of the customer and interaction with employees to the minimal level. Because by keeping the interaction at a minimal level and keeping those actions on part of the customer limited, you can control costs. You can control costs, and you also can control certain processes which are supporting that particular interaction, but you cannot control that interaction. In order to influence the customer to play his role very effectively, so that the employee can also play his role very productively, we make this conscious decision about the visibility and invisibility, meaning which actions should be played above the line of visibility and which should be the ones which are played backstage, meaning among employees in support of the actions which you can see as a customer or as front-end employee. The fact is that you will find this benefit extremely interesting and exciting when you look into the nature of different services. Because of different nature of services, you would like to decide as a strategic matter what should be above the line of visibility and what should be below that. It is because of this reason that companies like to get into automation, and if banks like to get into offering ATMs, it is not just because they just want to use the latest technology. It is because they want to minimize the interaction between customers and the front-end employees, thereby ensuring consistent quality and also costs. This is the essence of this particular benefit of the blueprinting. There are so many different facets to this particular dimension, which again I would like to leave to your imagination in relation to different services. Think of different services and try to relate these concepts to them in terms of visibility, invisibility, and the support component, and so on and so forth, so that you really can become very familiar with the essence of the concept of blueprinting. Another benefit is that it kickstarts strategic discussion on all procedures by involving everyone, excluding chances of any omissions. Nothing can be left out if we have everybody on board. And what happens is we make it very realistic for everyone to start realizing and appreciating the roles and contributions made by others. If the case was otherwise, meaning if we did not involve everybody into the process, then the process would be incomplete and inaccurate. The interpretation of the process would be biased. So for the sake of making the whole thing complete and accurate and very objective, we include everyone into the process and make that part of the blueprint. I think this is a huge benefit which any company can derive if it really understands the importance of the essence of blueprint. This is not to say that companies cannot really come up with a blueprint. It is a simple exercise but the importance lies in understanding and appreciating the significance of the concept. And if you really can appreciate that, you can draw so many benefits which are extremely strategic in nature. And this is what I'm trying to rub in. The next benefit is that the blueprinting becomes the basis of costing and revenues and capital expenditure. Again, a very interesting benefit. We can translate different tasks into costs because we know how much it costs to have different people work toward a particular process. And once we have the costing, we can always place costs against projected revenues because we certainly have projections of sales, and on that basis we can come up with some very interesting kind of financials for the company. The reason it also can become the basis of capital expenditure because it really takes us into all those points which are the stress points in terms of either quality or where we might fail. So what happens is we like to come up with certain support component. We like to have automation, we like to have computerization, and we like to have those processes which might involve some sophisticated equipment. And once we have the technological advantage, we really can make sure that our service is going to be second to none, better than our competitors. So in order to outcompete our competitors, we might need all those supports, and that costs money. And that is why we have to get into capital expenditure. And that is identified with the help of the blueprinting. Each and every step should be supported in the support component section with the kind of equipment or with the kind of electronic process or manual process which you think is extremely important, not only in terms of the delivery of the service, but also in terms of the quality of the service or in terms of the possibility of failing. And therefore, we must not hesitate investing into those supports. The next benefit is that blueprinting becomes the basis of internal and external marketing. And I think it is very obvious for us to understand why. Because it really highlights the need for the cross-training, the need to have specialists, and the need to have an extremely well-coordinated teamwork. And once we are mindful of all those factors, we get into the mechanism of internal marketing. We start conducting seminars and training programs whereby we can train people about different functions and talk about the importance of all these stress points in terms of quality and where we might fail. We also talk about recovery strategies in terms of this kind of training. The external marketing becomes important whenever we think that we have to reinforce the message of availability of our service, or in the first place we have to introduce a particular service, and that also becomes very obvious with the help of a service blueprint. And those points which we think are to be stressed in terms of external communication, which is advertising and promotions and so on and so forth, we start looking at that as well. So a very beautiful combination of internal marketing as well as external marketing is something which is presented to us by blueprinting. The next benefit is that it really gives us the opportunity of communicating with each other. And communication within the organization could be top-down or the bottom-up. Regardless of whether the communication is the top-down or bottom-up, the essence lies in having people interact with each other. And we can see that, as we know, on the blueprint where interaction takes place below the line of visibility and also during the support, the processes, the stage, meaning that we really can have an X-ray of the support component as well, and therefore all the points of interaction between different employees get highlighted. And when that kind of communication takes place, the people within the organization could really have a tremendous opportunity of talking about all those organizational issues which really matter in strategic terms. May those be quality points, may those be fail points, meaning possible fail points, or may those be any further improvements just to stay ahead of competition, and that could be for the training, capital expenditure on inclusion of some more sophisticated equipment and hiring of more people, and so on and so forth. You can get into so many different kinds of discussions on the philosophical level and also on the methodological level. The rationale and logic behind the service which you are delivering, or the features that you might envision including into your existing service, could also be discussed, because you have the opportunity to discuss that with anyone and everyone. Now, this is something which keeps taking place on a perpetual basis, but the beauty lies in envisioning this kind of a possibility and putting all that onto the paper, and then making that kind of a perpetual program of improvements. So in other words, it leads us towards getting into a continuous program of improvements toward the delivery of service. The last the benefit, which is benefit number 10, and I would not call it very conclusive, and not really being the last one, because there could be many other associated benefits, and therefore just to keep it the brief, by not getting into too many details, let us talk about the benefit of balancing between different outputs and inputs that blueprinting offers. I think that we already have learned quite a bit about the balancing, but the reason of rubbing that in again is that this is something which must not be lost sight of. And whenever you are coming up with a blueprint, you must look at the blueprint from the standpoint of building into it the different output levels and matching those with the input levels. You'll have to get into some simple arithmetic where you allocate time and then measure that time against every task which is being performed, and then come up to see with a collective time spent on performing different tasks, and then seeing whether there's a balance between those tasks or not. So what you can do is come up with a hypothetical kind of a blueprint, taking any service of your choice, and then think of all the tasks which form that blueprint, come up with 4 different levels, and develop roles and relationships. It can be a project, to be very honest with you, and then try to come up with all the job descriptions, if you really can. Keep it very simple, but nevertheless try to think about the relationships which present themselves while you are going through all this, and you will realize that you really have undertaken an exercise which will lead you toward developing a whole lot of structure of the organization, and it will take you into the nature of the service also, and then you will start looking into the classification of services, so on and so forth. I don't really want to make this very large to the point of being unfocused for you guys, but all I'm saying is that you should be in a position to come up with a blueprint, and when you do come up with a print, you have the ability to look into all those benefits that I've talked about. And before the benefits, what considerations that you must take are the ones, again, that we have learned. And in the hope that our understanding about the blueprinting is complete and we really can come up with an accurate one, I would like to take you to the next topic, which is about choosing an operational position for your service. This is a very important strategic point, and is in continuation of the strategic process which I started talking about a couple of lectures back. You will recall I talked about the development of overall business strategy, and that took us into the phase of service strategy development. And whatever I've talked about from then up to now is part of the service strategy development. The meaning starting with how we come up with a service and the kinds of services we have, meaning existing services, new services, and the kind of customers that we may have to approach, meaning existing customers and new customers, and then right down to blueprinting has been a part of the service strategy development. And the next, the big phase is the phase of choosing an operational position, and that is where we stand today. Just because I don't really want you guys to have any confusion, I have made it clear to you where we started a couple of lectures back and where we stand today. And again, keep it in your mind that the steps that I've tried to teach you are the ones which you have to understand in relation to each other, so that you can come up with the building blocks of knowledge and be able to analyze a service design or come up with a new service design and then introduce that in the marketplace. But before you introduce that in the marketplace, you've got to be very clear about the operational position that you must take. And this is where we are. Well, just like in manufacturing, we choose an operational position, and we choose that the operational position because we have the opportunity and luxury of production and consumption taking place at different times and different places. There is no such lapse on the services side. Consumption and production take place at the same time and at the same place. Therefore, we just cannot have the same strategies and the same techniques as we apply on the tangible goods side. We have to have certain changes, the variations or adaptations of the same policies and techniques. What are those techniques or the strategies that manufacturers could have at their disposal in order to come up with a very specific operational position? Well, those could be the following. They can get into either the unit production, meaning if the product is such that they must specialize in the unit production, they do that. So that is kind of an operational position that they take and specialize in. They also have the opportunity of getting into batch processing or mass production or a continuous process if they're dealing with a product like oil, for example. So depending upon the nature of the product, manufacturers really have the opportunity of choosing one of the positions that I've just enumerated. Why do they choose one of these positions? Because the basic objective is to achieve the maximum level of efficiency and productivity. Nothing can be haphazard or ad hoc. Everything has got to be very well designed and defined. And that is why you like to come up with blueprinting. May that be a production process on the manufacturing side or on the services side. Once you are clear about that design, you've got to choose a position. So what is the position that you may take when it comes to services? We are clear about the positions that are available to manufacturers or to us if we happen to be the manufacturers. The positions that are available to us as service providers are three. And these are the ones, if I remember correctly, I did talk about very briefly in one of the very early lectures. Three positions are the position of cost efficiency, of operations. Number two is customization. And the number three is service quality. So in order to adopt one of the positions, we've got to be very clear as to which strategy is the one that has the greatest level of compatibility with the nature of service that we are producing and selling. Because the idea is to achieve efficiencies, productivity, and also be good at quality and be profitable. And in order to achieve all these very macro and major objectives, we've got to be very clear whether we like to achieve cost efficiency or like to get into customization, whereby we start offering different products to different segments or different customers. We may get down to the segment of one and things like that. Or we want to get onto the quality side, and we get onto the quality side, we again have two options. One of the options is that we are extremely good at the technical parameters of the service, in the meaning we are very, very good with the outcome. And the second option is that we are very good with the functional side. And the functional side is a function of so many different characteristics of adaptability, spontaneity, and so on and so forth. Those are the dimensions that you are really very clear about. So these three positions that offer themselves are the ones that we choose one from. Now, very important point to remember is that when we pick one of the positions of operations in services, it does not mean that we choose that to the exclusion of the other two. The fact remains that we've got to maintain a competitive parity of all the positions with our competitors, but then there has to be one position we emphasize. So this is the word to be underlined, that the position that we think that we should be emphasizing is the one that we choose for our services. And could we still stay extremely good at the two other areas which are there for us to work on. And in totality, these are three basic areas. What are the strategies that we follow, and what are the dynamics behind emphasizing or choosing, for that matter, one of the positions are going to be the points of learning in the next lecture for the shortage of time. And therefore, I would like to cut my lecture right here and give you a summary of what I've talked about today. Well, basically, this lecture has been an extension of the previous one, which I started with imparting knowledge in relation to service design and blueprinting. And I really have dilated on the concept of blueprinting in today's lecture by telling you there's so many different considerations that you must take while you are designing a service. And if you really can come up with a good blueprint and hence a very accurate service design, you certainly stand very bright chances of deriving the benefits which I talked about. And I talked about 10 major benefits which are all of very high strategic nature. So that's the learning of today's lecture. And in the next one, I would continue with the operational position that we might like to take in relation to our service that we are selling. Thank you very much. Until then, and Allah Hafiz.